Welcome to the second in the three-part webinar series entitled Getting Rid of the Annual Performance Review. My name is Anthony Lachu. I'm the Director of Business Development at ASL, Hire to Retire Software since 1989. Today's session is entitled Lead or Follow: How to Boost Company Performance. Again, we are pleased to have with us Dr. David Cohen. Dr. Cohen is a global thought leader in the area of integrated HR processes. He has authored a number of books and is a regular presenter at global HR conferences and workshops. So without further ado, and coming to us today from the great state of Tennessee, please join me in welcoming Dr. David Cohen. David?
Thank you very much. I appreciate people taking their time, share their time with me, and hopefully the presentation I'm about to make will generate some thought, perhaps generate some questions, which please send in your questions as you go along. And Anthony, you'll collect the questions and interject as questions come in, please.
That's correct.
Okay, so we'll be able to capture your questions in real time. If there are questions at the end that we have run out of time, I will respond to them and we'll send out the questions to everybody. And if anybody wants a copy of the slides, please email me the information or to ASL, and we'll make sure you get a copy of the slides. What I aim to cover today is, what is your performance management vision? Why is having a vision or having a direction on performance management essential to setting up an effective performance management process? Talked a little bit about it in the last session. Want to expand upon that. Are the behavioral competencies authentic to the culture of the organization? I want to share my perspective on that, because the purpose of performance management is to reinforce, improve, sustain good corporate performance through the right behaviors. And the authenticity of those behaviors has often been an obstacle, or the lack of understanding of those behaviors has often been an obstacle to many people using them effectively. Does coaching really help? Are we really doing people a favor by using coaching? And if coaching isn't really the right word to use, what is the right word? And the last thing I want to talk about is moving to greater productivity, getting people's performance management to work. Is what is the place of consequences, and what is the general use of the term consequences in performance management? However, I do want to be clear, drawing from Socrates and what I mentioned earlier. I can't teach you anything. People out there probably know more than I do about performance management from their own point of view, their company's point of view. My job here is to kindle a flame of inquiry and to help you think, perhaps think in areas you haven't thought about before, or to reinforce some thinking that perhaps you haven't articulated out loud. So the first question is, what is your company's vision for performance management? What is the role of performance management in your organization? For everything, there's a purpose, is clear, and without purpose, if something's been successful or not, there's no way of measuring it. So how do you know that your performance management process has been successful? Wherever the employees want to be is good enough. Anything to anyone could be good enough, because that's what I kind of hear now from organizations that have performance management. It's kind of a catch-all for everything. It's an unpleasant activity to complete it once a year. It's a human resource thing, not a business activity, and the rules are based on activity of little meaning and great fiction. You know, I often say that there's two places in the corporate world that great fiction has been written. One is on resumes and the other is on performance reviews. So how do I get the performance management process to have a greater meaning, a greater purpose, and it's not just an activity that has to be done in order to justify a merit or bonus or cost of living or something else, that it has greater meaning than that. Organizations need to have a greater purpose, therefore, for conducting performance reviews as a process, not an activity. If the performance review or performance management is seen as a once-a-year activity, it's not going to have purpose. The process needs to clarify itself by having clearly defined outcomes. What are the outcomes that are to be achieved as a result of going through the performance management process? Because without clearly defined outcomes, how do we know we're getting there? And measurements of percentages completed, number of action plans signed off on, and similar activities are not meaningful measurements. So everybody's worried about big data and things to measure. So how do you measure your performance management process as being successful and accurate if you haven't first determined before you started the process what the process is supposed to entail? So what would be meaningful to your organization? Would it be greater alignment to the strategic business objectives, higher levels of engagement, greater retention numbers, increased productivity, improved safety, greater quality, greater lost time accidents, advancements in innovation, improved number of high performers, improved demonstration of the desired behaviors leading to better business results, greater teamwork? What is the purpose of your of a process that's meaningful to your organization? So simply, without a vision for performance management, there is no cohesive direction. It remains an activity, and it really relies on each manager in their own way and each employee in his or her own way defining what performance management is, what the content's going to be, and how's it going to be used. In order for the performance management process to work, you need to know what is the purpose. If you don't know the purpose, you don't know if it's successful. If you don't know where you're going, any destination will do. Second question, behavioral competencies. And I'm going to spend some time on this, and it's important, and I hope to generate some feedback, questions, and comments, because I'm about to present a perspective on the development and usage of behavioral competencies authentic to the organization, which would reinforce a title that I was given by the Conference Board of Canada the other day at a conference in Ottawa as the contrarian consultant. So hopefully this section, as I said, will stimulate some thought, perhaps shed some new light on your thinking, and make you perhaps even question, are our behavioral competencies we're using the right set of behavioral competencies? The classic definition of competencies was written in the book Competencies at Work by Spencer and Spencer, basically meaning any skills, knowledge, or action, behavior required to accomplish the desired results of a job or job family. For this presentation, I want to focus only on behavioral competencies. So when I mention the word competencies, I am referring only to behavioral competencies, not skill and knowledge, not education and experience, but behavioral competencies. These are the actions or behaviors required to successfully execute the job to achieve the desired business outcomes. Therefore, they are statements of behaviors that are unique to the organization's values, culture, and business strategy. So let me expand on that a little bit. Many organizations have articulated their values. Those values, unfortunately, when an employee walks by them and sees them on the wall, they become cynical because they say something to the akin, "I wish." Even if the organization has accurately defined the values, they have not defined them usually behaviorally. At best, they've some very nice generic statement of respect or integrity or whatever it might be. And in that generic statement, it then allows, it sort of sounds like it came from, taken from a Hallmark card, um, greeting card, because it said something very nicely, but what it means actually in the workplace is up for interpretation by every employee. So while organizations have taken measures to articulate the behaviors or what they think are the right behaviors for the organization, they often forget that values are lived in actions that are represented by behaviors that are taken by people, and that there needs to be clear behavioral statements for the values of the organization. Now, that also means that if it's a value, it's universally applied. Universally applied means it's the same value and same behavior at every level of the organization. They cannot be a different definition of respect at an entry level and the CEO have a completely different definition of respect. If it's universally applied, which is part of the definition of a value, then it's got to be the same for every role in the organization. So the role or job behaviors must be consistent in their alignment to the values of the organization. The test if of your behavioral competency statements are, will this in fact go contrary to the values of the organization? If you have a statement that does in fact question whether if I do that, will I live the values, then even though you might have it in your model, it's the wrong statement to have in your model. The issue with most companies, therefore, competency models are too numerous and too much information to cover in this one brief session. The key cause for competency models not being understood and in turn not used in performance management correctly by employees and by managers is why they resist it with the following reasons. They are not authentic to the organization. What does that mean? If they're not authentic to the organization, it means that they are aspirational in nature, that there's nobody in the organization that has ever lived these behaviors. And those perhaps who have lived these behaviors, such as risk-taking, have failed, and there's nothing in there about learning from one's mistakes. So taking a risk at a certain level becomes a career-ending activity, but yet the model says we're supposed to take risk. The other problem that I find is that the models are taken from external consultants that have used them in other organizations and justified them being used in your organization based on a concept of transferable validity. Transferable validity is just as I stated. It means very simply that if it worked for A, it's going to work for B. But here's my problem with that. No two organizations are exactly the same. And as Tolstoy wrote in Anna Karenina in the beginning, every dysfunctional family is dysfunctional in its own way. Every corporation is functional and dysfunctional in its own unique way. Therefore, the behavior of what's respect in one company is not necessarily the behavior of respect in another company. Give you an example. We actually went through some of the profiles on values that we've done for organizations around the world, and we came up with 5 different definitions of respect, 5 different companies, all of which had definitions of respect which were uniquely different, and in some cases, what is respect in one place is disrespect in another place. Let me give you an example. If I want to show respect in a North American Western culture, I will show respect by questioning something that I don't agree with. I will show respect by reacting to something in a way that listens to somebody else and then shares my opinion. Because if I kept my opinion to myself, I'm not necessarily showing respect. Now, I take respect to a Asian culture, especially a Southeast Asian culture, and respect is not questioning your boss. Disrespect is coming up with a different opinion. So it is very difficult to imagine that companies would all have the same definition of any of the competencies. How I communicate in one company will be very different than how I communicate in another company, even in the same business, in the same town. So by taking these competency models from external consultants and bringing them into your organization as competencies and not necessarily rewriting them to your organization's needs or modifying them to your only modifying to your organization needs, is you're borrowing something. So if company A in the hospitality industry has used the same factors for success as company B in manufacturing of clothing, and they both have results-oriented, both defined the same way, or communication defined the same way, or customer service defined the same way, it would mean, in theory, that you can leave the manufactured clothing, go to the hospital or the hotel, and be successful in that organization without missing a beat. And we all know that that doesn't work. So one of the reasons that, and I'm talking about this because this needs to be the foundation for performance management. What differentiates a person's success on the job is not their skill and knowledge. It's their behavior. People are hired for their knowledge and experience. They're promoted for their results and their development, and they're fired for their interpersonal behavior. Have we defined the behaviors for success in our behavioral competency model that actually reflects authentically what will differentiate a highly successful from a less successful employee in our organization? The second point is sometimes these models are put together by expert panels. When was the last time a senior manager actually did the job for which they're putting the model together? How much do they really know? And is it not sometimes simply a wish list that we hope people actually act that way? So using a preset list is like putting blinders on an organization, like having a list of 50, 60, 70 competencies from which to choose from, and then to further choose the behaviors that fit the organization is limiting your thought. I'll give you an example. We worked with one hospital in Boston, Massachusetts, and their leadership behavior, and it turned out to be a value of the organization, was humility. But humility, as they define it, would not be captured in any of these lists. So what is missing? When we did work with the police service, for instance, in Calgary, one of the values of that police service, which can be traced back for many, many decades, is compassion. But if I were using a list that had been validated from other police services and imposed it on Calgary, they would have missed one of their values, let alone one of their behaviors, because compassion is not necessarily what most people associate with a police service. They're borrowed from best practices of other companies. Now, this best practice idea in human resources is a real issue. What is best practice for one company does not mean it's best practice for another company. All it means is that in the company that it's at, it worked for them. But since every company has a different set of values, and every company has therefore a different culture, and every company has a different business model and is working in different geographical regions, what we might find in HR are mostly common practices, and what's best for one company doesn't mean it's best for another. So if we're looking for this is best practices that people use our model, that's wrong. It can't be. The other problem is, and this is another major problem with these behavioral models, is they're not written as behavioral statements, they're written as outcome statements. What do I mean? Outcome statements are demonstrates the ability to communicate well with others. As a result of a certain action, it is determined that you communicate well. Is that action, and I can justify that action as an employee, saying I sent a WhatsApp message at 3 in the morning that was well written, articulate, cleared, spell well, good grammar. After all, I clearly communicated. The fact that nobody read the WhatsApp message at 3 in the morning doesn't mean anything. It might mean that I sent an email, but it got lost somewhere in a spam folder, and nobody ever checked it. So a behavioral statement for communication would be something to the effect, listens to another person's opinion until the person fully completes their thought, or responds to others only after they've gained information of the other person's perspective. I know that if you look at competency models and you look at words in those competency models, one of the keys that it's an outcome statement and not a behavioral statement is the first word demonstrates. If the first word demonstrates, you probably are looking at a model that is an outcome model, not a competency model. The other thing which I mentioned earlier is they're based on aspirational behaviors, or on an overt set of values that nobody in the organization has ever lived. In fact, that sometimes in those organizations, when an employee starts to live those aspirational values, they actually get in trouble because nobody's ever done it before. There's a desire to do it, but in reality, when I do it, since somebody else does it, I'm the odd person out. So they're accepted by the organization because the consultant selling them says that they are validated and represent best practice. First of all, they're validated by whom and what kind of validation. Just because they worked in one organization, they don't work in another. I do a lot of work in Southeast Asia over the last number of years, and the imposition of Western models from corporate head offices, multinationals, have actually caused local leaders to act incorrectly with the local employee base because the model is never adjusted geographically. It's one size fits all. Because they are the content, so why is it getting these right? They need to be the content of the dialogue that is being held between the direct report and their manager. There needs to be a calibrated, clear understanding between the direct report and their manager of what the desired behaviors look like in their workplace. And if they're simply outcome statements, it allows a manager in location A to work with her employees to define them one way, and in the same company, a manager with employees in location B to define them as they see fit. And therefore, there's no consistency between the models. There's no consistency in predictability of behavior. So getting the results in a way that is desired to make sure that people live the right behaviors, there needs to be, to get performance management right, there needs to be an internally developed, validated internally set of behaviors that have been demonstrated by those people in the organization who are highly successful. How are the highly successful people acting different than the less successful people? Without a behavioral competencies, you cannot have a meaningful dialogue. Without having a definition of the purpose of performance management, which is usually to improve performance, you're improving performance towards what? Are you setting your organization up for failure by putting in a competency model that is not clearly understood and doesn't represent what authentically people do within the organization? So your behavioral competencies are accurate and authentic when they are based on critical incident interviews or focus interviews with people who currently are highly successful using the desired behaviors. They are validated internally by a wider group of employees who are in the same role or similar roles, or report to that role, or are involved in that in interaction with that role. By doing a content validation study internally, you also find out, is it clearly articulated, is it clearly understood, and do people, whether they do that behavior or not, recognize that that is the behavior that leads to success. They are not accurate when they are based on a predefined list or set of cards that narrow the focus, but on versus an open-ended, appreciative inquiry approach as to why people are truly successful. In order to do that, it will allow you to have an authentic, covert set of values that are clearly understood in terms of behavior that people can have a common dialogue with. Because one of the problems is person A might define somebody as doing that behavior, thinks they're really good. They get promoted to another or transferred to another job. The new manager says, I'm getting this really high performer. They never actually understood the behaviors, or the behaviors weren't authentic to the organization, and suddenly the new manager is angry at the old manager because this person doesn't demonstrate the behaviors the way the new manager felt they should be demonstrated. They lead, therefore, to, if they're done correctly, behaviors are the underpinning to lead to the successful execution of business strategies. Otherwise, why should they be in there? One of the behaviors that I love that are often in models that I've seen are something around work-life balance. Work-life balance is defined differently by every organization. It never means 1 hour for you and 1 hour for me. But if people define work-life balance authentically or because it's politically correct? Have you said work-life balance is you give the organization whatever is needed to be given in the time that is needed to be given, and at other times we give you balance, or however it might be worded. They are stated. The other problem with behavioral models, which makes it really complicated, is they have more than one behavioral statement in them. In other words, I successfully work with internal and external customers. By having both in the same sentence, what if I deal with internal customers really well and freeze with external customers? How do I deal with that in a behavioral model when I'm using it for performance feedback and have to score that one sentence? Do I score them based on the internal or the external, or they split the difference and not tell the truth and give them a middle score? Additional points on behavioral competencies: they must be the same for all talent management activities, so you can't use a different set of competencies for recruitment, a second set of competencies for performance improvement, and a third set of competencies for leadership development. They have to be the same behavioral statements for the same roles all the time. Behavioral models, in order to get people to focus on them, because you can only expect that which you're willing to inspect, you must have them clearly used in performance management. The expectations, therefore, are these are the behaviors that are required for success. Therefore, you can't. And the other problem with performance reviews, and talking about and changing performance reviews, is I still don't understand organizations that have on their behavioral competency rating scale and exceeds expectation. I don't understand it. Let me give you an example. If I have a behavior of respect, the expectation, because that's the nature of behavioral models, is that every time I have an opportunity to demonstrate respect, regardless of the person I am working with or dealing with, I must show respect. If I show respect 99% of the time and choose not to be respectful towards one person, I still need development. If I define respect, if I demonstrate respect to everybody all the time, that's what is expected of me. Therefore, I'm meeting expectations. As soon as you say, I exceed expectations in respect, doesn't mean that I meet expectations if I'm disrespectful to some people. So my concern is when it comes to behavioral models, using a scale instead of an anecdotal story becomes a real problem, because the anecdotal story is not anchored, the scale is not anchored in realities of how you measure behavior. You measure behavior by frequency of the number of opportunities available and the number of times the person actually did it in regards to each opportunity. So a summary of this one before we go to the next section. Are your behavioral competencies authentic, truly authentic to your company? Are your statements of behaviors essentially either job description statements, fancy job description statements, or outcome statements? Have your behavioral competencies been validated by your employees as differentiating internal to your company, highly successful from less successful employees, or were they written by an expert panel who says in theory these should be right, but in reality they're not? Do all employees understand the behavioral competencies in all locations the same way? Have you just introduced the competency models or taken the time to introduce them through a series of calibration meetings? So does coaching help? Now this is going to be a sensitive subject because everybody loves coaching. Coaching is a very popular subject, and coaching is something that everybody is, or just about everybody in our business is either getting certified in or involved in. Everyone has their own definition of coaching. There is no universal definition of coaching. Coaching used to be seen by employees as the step before dismissal. I'm only getting a coach because the organization thinks I need to change a behavior. It has evolved to a badge of honor. I have a coach because they believe in me. I have a coach because I can be developed. I have a coach because they're committed to me. So it has kind of taken a 180 from where it started or where it was perceived to be started to where it is. But is that really coaching, or is that really mentoring or instruction or teaching? Because what is coaching? So like performance management, when you put coaching in place, there needs to be a definition for your organization of what coaching is and what are the expected outcomes. Now, the usual purpose of coaching is to get a person to stop using a particular behavior and to get them to demonstrate the desired behaviors more frequently. Therefore, coaching is intended as a continuous performance improvement activity. Coaching is about holding a person accountable for their actions and ensuring that the actions of the employee align with the values and competencies of the organization. A coach is a person that, however, that would not transfer an unsuccessful employee to another department because they don't have the courage to fire them. A coach would be honest with the person and exit them from the company. A coach is more than just being a nice person. Let me give you an example. One of the proudest things I've done in my 28 years of consulting is having worked with the University of Notre Dame hockey team in helping develop the team. And it's where I really began to understand the full meaning of coaching, though I've been involved with sports literally all my life. putting in the perspective of the coach Dave Poulin at the time was quite meaningful, because Dave's idea was to do whatever it takes to teach, mentor, and coach his players to be the best that they can be on the ice as a team member. However, he also had a certain standard of performance that they must attain in order to stay on the team. His job as the coach was to release anybody from the team who didn't behave according to the standards of behaviors set out by himself and the University of Notre Dame, and also to release any players that didn't match the skill and knowledge necessary to be successful on the team. My concern is that people go into coaching and organizations teach coaching without teaching the responsibility of a coach in a corporate setting is to recognize when somebody's not cutting it and to fire them. Because if you don't use the full range of coaching, you're not really coaching. It falls short. Because a coach has to decide, if this employee isn't going to cut it, I'm not transferring them to another division. I'm not transferring them to another department so they're somebody else's problem. I'm releasing them from the corporation. So frequently I say there's great fiction and business written, as I said, in resumes and performance reviews. And the reason for that is that coaches, business coaches, internal business coaches, and external, don't feel they can be totally honest because, well, he's had 3 managers before me. All 3 knew that he didn't do this. Who am I to come along and tell him this? What's the performance review going to look like if we fire him when everybody else is not told the truth? But yet I know that when people are cut from an organization, after the anger subsides, a year later you meet them someplace, and they're really happy because they began to realize they didn't work out in that organization, and that they are happy now because they found an organization that really fits their needs. As a result of that, you've actually done them a favor by being honest with them. But that rigorous honesty in organizations is really difficult. So what I did is I looked at Merriam-Webster Dictionary, as a lot of people would do, and say, what is coaching? Coaching is to make decisions about how the team plays during the game. And if somebody isn't playing during the game, they got to be cut from the team. And that is my concern about coaching. That's why I believe that in performance management and performance management improvement, coaching isn't going to work, because coaches, business coaches, internal coaches, don't have the courage to be brutally honest with direct reports, but be brutally honest in an objective, non-opinionated way by using the behavioral competencies correctly, by simply holding up a mirror and saying, describe for me your actions in that situation. And they describe the actions honestly, holding up the competency model of behaviors and saying, how does this align to the competency models of behavior? Let the employee take accountability for their own performance and take the guilt off of managers. What it falls down to, if you don't do this, you're going to wind up with the following. You're going to wind up with employees that are not living the values of the organization, that you should say goodbye to, but you don't. They are going to continuously be not demonstrating the desired behaviors, living the values, and not getting results. You're going to get employees that obviously are great contributors. They are role models for the behaviors of the organization. They deserve recognition and often get recognition. You're also going to continuously have employees that continuously live the values, role model the values, but don't have the skill and knowledge to execute their current job. There's an easy fix to that. And you will also have those employees in your organization that are very high on the values, are very high on the results, and don't live the values and create a wake of disaster behind them. So what do we wind up with? We wind up with the following. We wind up with deadwood, and I've been known to say to senior leaders who have allowed deadwood to perpetuate, what did you think of your manager when you were in a previous position that didn't get rid of deadwood and made you work extra hours, made you work harder? Now people are thinking the same of you. They're your stars in your organization that, as I said, deserve recognition. It is only from the star group that, in my opinion, you take your high performers. You have your keepers because these are the people, if you let go, everybody feels threatened because these are the people that role model the values of the organization. And then you have your viruses. Your viruses are simply those people who get rewarded and recognized for getting the job done in a Machiavellian way that ignores the true meaning of what it means to work in this place. A virus test is real simple. It's a beautiful day, you're ready to go home, and on call display a name comes up. And you know if you deal with this person, you're going to get blamed for everything that's wrong with the world. And you're going to be there extra hours. You're going to have frustration build up. Viruses are the people in the organization that, in the next section I'm going to briefly talk about, need consequences built into their performance plan, because without meaningful consequences, they're never going to change. And if they never change, they should be dismissed from the organization. And every time they are dismissed from the organization, I can anecdotally tell you that the person with the right behaviors who replaces them has always increased the level of performance of the previous person. So consequences. These are what make a difference in performance management. And if you are going to move to a performance management process that ends the annual review, and let me say something about this that I didn't say in the last session. Those organizations, and I've studied a lot of them, those organizations that have ended the annual review and formal annual review and ended the performance rating have actually significantly increased the discipline of having regular reviews more frequently. So it's not the end of performance management. It's not the end of performance feedback. It's actually a period of time that with the dismissal of the year-end formal review, there's a necessity to significantly increase the honesty and frequency of these performance discussions. And as I said, those discussions have to have a clear purpose and have to be based on authentic behaviors to be demonstrated consistently within the organization. The last element that I think they need in order to be more productive to move forward is consequences. Consequences, when you mention that word consequences, it usually has a negative connotation. Consequences are not considered by most people as positive. Yet, there are positive and negative consequences. Consequences can be used to reinforce a behavior or to decrease a behavior, to increase a behavior to greater frequency or decrease the behavior to less frequency. And after all, is that not the purpose of performance improvement conversations? Almost all human beings' behavior is learned, if not all. It is learned as a result of our interaction with the environment and people and events in our life. All behavior, therefore, occurs for a reason knowingly or unknowingly. No behavior occurs just out of the blue. Behavior continues to occur because we know by doing this behavior, it is effective. So one behavior we all learned back in our early years in elementary school is how to make excuses that we haven't gotten our homework done. We then learn, since that worked, as we get into junior school, middle school, and high school, that hey, we can increase these excuses to other areas. And then we learn at university how to really perfect excuse management. So by the time we get to the workplace, we have perfected to the point of being a PhD in excuse management, which then allows us to rationalize away why we didn't meet our commitments, and managers who are used to giving and accepting excuses have non-achievement of objectives coupled with great excuses and blaming others as acceptable performance. And the person gets meet expectations. Not because they actually met it, but because they perfected the behavior of excuse management. Behaviors stop occurring because I have found out that they're ineffective. So one, events occurring after the behavior need to have consequences. They need to have consequences that allow the person to get what they want, or if they don't, they'll get away with what they want to get away with. People leave you alone, therefore you'll never change your behavior. And get a scolding from others might cause you to change your behavior, or lose someone valuable to you might cause you to change your behavior. So what I believe needs to happen in performance management to move behavior to a different level of performance, it needs to have reinforcing consequences which focus the person on the positive, and punishment consequences that decrease the probability of repeating the behavior. However, if you really want to move the needle, don't focus on the punishment, focus on the positive. The more people get positive feedback, the more they see it leads to recognition they didn't get before, the more positive they're going to be in accomplishing the results that are desired. Simply put, behavior is a function of its consequences. For positive behavior, you have to give positive reward. But managers and others do negative scanning of behaviors all the time. Recognition by leaders is a powerful tool. It also costs no money, but yet think about a senior leader coming to somebody's work area on the front line or middle management and congratulating them for demonstrating in a difficult situation the positive behavior. You know, I often, when we're training on performance management, I often say to the group, I say, you know, Joan, you know, say I'm walking through your work area and I suddenly see Joan over there, and I say to Joan, see me in my office in 5 minutes. And the reaction of everybody working with Joan is, ooh, she's in trouble. And Joan gets to my office, and I say, Joan, you know, we've set up that you're supposed to be working on this particular behavior. You've been telling me that you've been working on it. I've seen evidence you're working on it, but I got a phone call the other day from somebody you were working with who recognized the difference in your performance because of the change in behavior. And they really think it's great. They think you're more effective. And in fact, they want you to work with them on a special project. So all I want to say, Joan, is keep up the good work. Stay focused. You're doing a great job. Now, when Joan goes back to her work area, what happens? Everybody says, Joan, why are you in trouble? And then Joan shares the knowledge that she got positive feedback for doing the right behavior. To which others then say subconsciously, if I want the recognition from the boss, which is positive, I need to demonstrate the same behaviors. So don't give cost of living increases, bonuses, or merit pay to those people who are doing the wrong behaviors, even if they're getting 150% of their results. Because by giving them bonus, merit, or cost of living, you're saying it's okay to screw up on the behaviors because you got the results, which means everybody learns very quickly the behaviors are not really what counts. When you reward a virus, you are inadvertently giving positive feedback and support for the wrong behaviors. Everything else, everyone sees that. Remember, people do what they do because of what happens to them when they do it. So if you're giving that positive reinforcement for the wrong behaviors, you are positively reinforcing the wrong behaviors. So some questions for you to consider as I wrap things up. Do you include in your performance management process inadvertent negative consequences, such as giving recognition to people who get results but don't use the right behaviors? Is money your only positive consequence? Because if it is, it's going to have a short-term impact and long-term negative consequence. Do managers go about catching people doing something right, or do they go about catching people doing something wrong? Are consequences believed to be a negative term for when you are doing something wrong and only applied when you do something wrong? Questions to consider on how you set up your performance reviews. Final thoughts. What is your philosophy or vision for performance management? In other words, what have you defined as the purpose of performance management to define success in your organization? What processes have you put in place to reinforce that? Are your behavioral competencies based on transferable validity and some list from another client, from another organization that a consultant has put together and saying, these are the core competencies that lead to success, when in fact they don't lead to success. And even if some of them were right, nobody in the organization that counts, that actually does the job, has been involved in the articulation of those behaviors. And often those behaviors are written in such words that only HR people understand. They're not the authentic lingo of the organization. Do you include positive and negative consequences as a part of your performance management process? So at this point, I'll throw it open to questions. We got 4 minutes left. We started a few minutes late. So if there are any questions, or if you want to email me any questions, there's my email address or my phone number. The book Inside the Box I wrote came out in 2001, and very much is about how to identify the authentic culture of an organization, not the aspirational culture, and how to articulate the behaviors that define the authentic values of the organization. And there's a number of case studies in there of organizations who have been successful at it and case studies of organizations who failed at it. So I thank you very much for your attention and listening. I've talked too much. I've talked enough. Are there any questions?
So without any additional questions or further questions, David, thank you for that very insightful presentation this afternoon. We look forward to the third in the series in April. And thank you, ladies